3 weeks after the terrorist attack, Kepler Station had been fully repaired and normal operations had resumed. The diplomatic reception that had been interrupted by the explosions was rescheduled, and once again the grand ballroom filled with alien dignitaries from across the galaxy. But this time, the atmosphere was very different. Jake stood near the same wall where he had watched the original confrontation between Lisa and Vexthara, but now he wore a formal diplomatic uniform instead of his maintenance clothes. The station's administration had promoted him to Chief of Cross-Species Technical Operations, a new position created specifically to recognize his heroic actions during the crisis. Lisa moved through the crowd with new confidence, her grandmother's canvas bag repaired and hanging proudly from her shoulder. The tear that had occurred during the rescue was now barely visible, sewn with thread that Jake had obtained from the station's textile supplies. She had refused several offers from alien artisans who wanted to replace the bag with something more elaborate. The reunion reception was being broadcast live across the galactic communication network, with millions of beings watching from their home planets. News of the rescue had spread quickly through alien social media, creating the first positive human news story that many species had ever heard. Vexthara entered the ballroom exactly as he had 3 weeks earlier, but everything about his presence was different. He still wore expensive clothes and jewelry that marked his high social status, but he carried a simple bag made from materials donated by dozens of different species. Each piece of fabric told a story about cooperation and friendship between civilizations. The crowd parted as Vexthara made his way across the ballroom, but this time it was out of curiosity rather than deference to his wealth. Everyone knew why he was there, and cameras from news organizations throughout the galaxy followed his progress toward the spot where Lisa was standing. "Lisa Park," Vexthara said formally as he approached her. "I have come to fulfill a promise I made to myself while recovering from my injuries." He gestured to 2 aliens who had been following him, and they stepped forward carrying a large package, wrapped in decorative cloth. "I asked the finest artisans from my home world to work together on a project that would honor the courage you and Jake Martinez showed during the attack on this station." Vexthara carefully unwrapped the package, revealing Lisa's canvas bag. But now it had been transformed into something incredible. The original fabric was still there, including the repaired tier, but it had been reinforced with bioluminescent threading that highlighted rather than replaced the human craftsmanship. "Your bag now carries the finest Synthari bio-threading," Vexthara explained, "but it has been applied in a way that preserves every original stitch and mark. The threading responds to the emotional resonance of the items inside, so it will glow more brightly when you touch the photographs of your family or hold the items that your grandmother gave you." Lisa accepted the bag with amazement, feeling the subtle warmth of the living thread as it responded to her touch. The bioluminescence was gentle and respectful, enhancing the bag's natural character rather than overwhelming it. She could see that the artisans had understood exactly what made her bag special. "This is beautiful," Lisa said, "but you didn't need to do this. What you said in the medical bay was enough." Vexthara shook his head. "Words alone are not sufficient to undo the harm I caused. I humiliated you in front of hundreds of witnesses, and I want those same witnesses to see me acknowledge my error." He turned to face the crowd, which had gathered around them in a large circle. The ballroom was completely quiet except for the gentle hum of the recording equipment that was capturing every word for broadcast across the galaxy. 3 weeks ago, in this same room, I told Lisa Park that her bag was worthless. Vexthara said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the ballroom. I was wrong, and my error was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of value itself. The alien dignitaries listened intently as Vexthara continued his public apology. I believe that worth was determined by cost, that beauty came from expense. and that status was measured by the price of one's possessions. But during the terrorist attack, when I was dying in a contaminated maintenance shaft, I learned the difference between value and worth. Jake had moved closer to hear Vexthara's speech, and now the Xanthari gestured for him to join the group at the center of the ballroom. Jake Martinez risked his life to save mine, crawling through damaged sections of the station that could have killed him. He used tools and supplies that cost almost nothing, improvising solutions with materials from Lisa's bag that I had dismissed as garbage. The crowd murmured with appreciation as they heard details of the rescue that had not been included in the original news reports. Many of the aliens present had technical backgrounds, and they understood how difficult it would have been to navigate the damaged station systems under emergency conditions. The bag that I mocked contained emergency medical supplies that saved my life, Vexthara continued. It held photographs that reminded Lisa of the values her family had taught her, values that led her to help coordinate my rescue, despite my cruelty toward her. That bag was not worthless. It was priceless, because it contained the tools and inspiration needed to preserve life. He held up his own new bag, made from fabrics contributed by representatives of dozens of alien species. This bag I carry now is my attempt to learn from their example. Each piece of material was given freely by someone who wanted to support the idea that true worth comes from meaning, not money. It cost me nothing to acquire, but it is worth more to me than anything I have ever owned. The response from the alien dignitaries was immediate and overwhelming. Several species that had previously shown little interest in human culture began approaching Lisa and Jake to ask questions about Earth customs and values. Others wanted to hear more details about the rescue and the improvised solutions that had made it possible. Captain Ben Torres, who had led the security response during the terrorist attack, stepped forward to add his own perspective. The attack on Kepler Station was carried out by extremists who believed that humans had no place in galactic civilization. But the response to that attack proved them wrong. Jake Martinez and Lisa Park demonstrated qualities that every civilized species should admire: courage, ingenuity, and compassion. As the reception continued, Jake found himself surrounded by alien engineers who wanted to learn about human problem-solving techniques. He explained how humans were trained to improvise solutions using whatever materials were available, and how their education emphasized adaptability over rigid adherence to established procedures. Lisa was equally popular with the diplomatic staff, who were fascinated by her story about the family items in her bag and the way they had inspired her to help with the rescue. Several ambassadors asked if she would be willing to speak at cultural exchange events on their own planets. But the most significant change was in how the aliens viewed humans in general. The rescue had been recorded by security cameras throughout the station, and the footage showed Jake crawling through spaces that most alien species could not have navigated, using determination and creativity to overcome obstacles that advanced technology could not solve. Humans bring something unique to galactic civilization, Vexthara said in an interview that was broadcast later that evening. They have the ability to find value in simple things, to create solutions from humble materials, and to risk everything for strangers who have treated them poorly. These are not primitive traits. They are the foundation of true civilization. The terrorist attack that was supposed to drive humans away from galactic society had achieved exactly the opposite result. Within days of the broadcast, human applications for diplomatic and technical positions increased dramatically. Alien governments that had previously ignored Earth began requesting cultural exchange programs and technical cooperation agreements. Jake remained at Kepler Station as Chief of Cross-Species Technical Operations, but now his job included teaching alien engineers about human approaches to problem-solving. Lisa became Earth's youngest cultural attach, traveling between planets to help other species understand human values and customs. Vexthara used his wealth and influence to establish the Interspecies Understanding Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting cooperation between different civilizations. The foundation's symbol was a simple canvas bag surrounded by bioluminescent threading, representing the idea that true worth comes from meaning rather than expense. Years later, when historians studied the turning point in human-alien relations, they would trace it back to a moment in a ballroom when a maintenance worker and a diplomat's daughter chose to risk their lives for someone who had treated them with contempt. The rescue itself had taken only a few hours, but its effects changed the course of galactic civilization forever. Jake emerged from the service corridor, carrying Vexthara in his arms, both of them covered in dust and debris from their journey through the damaged station. The medical team rushed forward immediately, their scanners already analyzing the Zentharies. Conditioned before Jake had even set him down on the emergency stretcher. Severe respiratory distress and chemical poisoning, the lead medic announced as they began working on Vexthara. His lung tissue shows significant damage from the contaminated atmosphere. We need to get him to the medical bay immediately. Lisa appeared beside Jake as the medical team prepared to transport Vexthara. She had followed the route through the safer corridors while Jake made his dangerous rescue, and now she looked at both of them with concern. Jake was breathing heavily, and his skin showed signs of chemical exposure, but he had refused medical attention until Vexthara was stable. "You saved his life," Lisa said quietly as they watched the medical team work. Jake shook his head. "We?" "Saved his life. I couldn't have done it without your help, and your grandmother's supplies. That bag you carry isn't worthless at all." As the medical team lifted Vexthara's stretcher, the unconscious alien's hand fell to one side, and something dropped from his grasp onto the floor. It was his expensive bioluminescent bag, the one he had been so proud of at the diplomatic reception. The living light that had made it so beautiful was completely gone now, leaving behind what looked like ordinary fabric. Lisa picked up the bag and examined it. Without its bioluminescent properties, she could see that it was actually quite simple in construction. The exotic materials and advanced technology were impressive, but the bag itself served the same basic function as her own canvas messenger bag. It was just a container for carrying personal items. The bioluminescence dies when it's exposed to the kind of chemicals that were in those damaged sections, Jake explained. All that expensive alien technology, and it can't handle the same conditions that your grandmother's old bag survived. During the rescue, Lisa's canvas bag had torn when Jake used part of it to help create better handholds for carrying Vexthara. The contents had spilled out during their escape, and Lisa had quickly gathered them up, but now she could see that some of her precious family photos had been damaged. One photo in particular caught her attention. It showed her grandmother as a young woman, wearing her military uniform and standing beside a group of other soldiers. The image had been creased and stained during the rescue, but Lisa could still make out her grandmother's face, serious and determined, as she posed with her medical kit. "She would have been proud of what we did today," Lisa said, holding the damaged photo. "She always said that the most important things in life can't be bought with money." Jake nodded as he watched the medical team disappear around a corner, taking Vexthara toward the medical bay. "I hope he understands that when he wakes up." The terrorist attack on Kepler Station had lasted only 6 hours, but the damage was extensive. Captain Ben Torres and his security team had managed to capture or eliminate all of the attackers, but not before they had caused significant harm to the station's infrastructure and injured dozens of people. Jake spent the next 2 days working around the clock with other maintenance crews to repair the damaged systems. His knowledge of the station's layout, gained during his rescue of Vexthara, proved invaluable in reaching areas that other repair teams could not access. Lisa helped by coordinating with the diplomatic staff to ensure that alien guests received proper care and information about the ongoing repairs. On the third day after the attack, Lisa received a message asking her to come to the medical bay. Vexthara had regained consciousness and was asking to speak with both her and Jake. Lisa was nervous about the meeting, unsure how the proud alien would react to being rescued by the same humans he had humiliated. She found Jake already waiting. Outside Vexthara's room, still wearing his maintenance uniform, but looking cleaner than he had since the rescue. Together, they entered the medical bay, where Vexthara lay connected to several alien medical devices that monitored his recovery. The Xanthari looked very different from the confident socialite who had dominated the diplomatic reception. His crystal skin was pale and showed stress patterns that indicated he was still physically weak. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple medical gown, and his elaborate jewelry had been removed to allow the medical equipment to function properly. "I owe you my life," Vexthara said in careful English, his voice still hoarse from the chemical damage to his throat. "Both of you. I have been thinking about this since I regained consciousness, and I realize that I do not even know your names." "Jake Martinez," Jake said simply. "Lisa Park," Lisa added. Vexthara nodded slowly. "Jake Martinez and Lisa Park. I will remember these names for the rest of my life, however long that may be. The doctors tell me that without your intervention, I would have died in that maintenance shaft within minutes." He paused, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say next. "I have also been thinking about my behavior at the reception. My words were cruel and unnecessary, and they were based on ignorance about your species and your values." Lisa looked down at her canvas bag, which she had repaired using some of the techniques Jake had shown her. The tear was still visible, but the bag was functional again, and all of her precious photos were safely inside. "Your bag," Vexthara continued, noticing her gesture. "I said it was worthless, but I was wrong. During my time in that poisoned air, while I waited to die, I thought about the things that truly matter. Not the cost of an object, but the meaning it holds for the person who carries it." He gestured weakly toward a small table beside his medical bed. "My own bag is there, the one I was so proud of, that cost more than most people earn in their lifetimes. It is dead now, nothing more than expensive fabric. All of its beauty and technology could not survive the same conditions that your bag endured." Lisa picked up Vexthara's bag and examined it. Up close, she could see the intricate craftsmanship that had gone into its creation, even without the living light that had made it so spectacular. It was still a beautiful object, but she understood what Vexthara meant about its fragility. "The things inside your bag," Vexthara said. "I saw them when they spilled during the rescue. Photographs of your family, personal items that connect you to your history. Those have a value that cannot be measured in credits or status. They represent love, memory, connection to other people. My bag was valuable because it was expensive. Your bag is valuable because it contains your life." Jake listened to this conversation with interest, seeing a side of alien psychology that most humans never encountered. "So what happens now?" Vexthara was quiet for a long moment. "Now I must find a way to make amends for my ignorance. Not just to you two, but to your entire species. I have spent my life believing that worth was determined by wealth and status. But you have shown me that true value comes from character and courage." He looked directly at Lisa. "You could have left me to die in that maintenance shaft. After the way I treated you, it would have been understandable. But instead, you helped save my life, risking your own safety in the process. That is a kind of nobility that no amount of money can purchase." Lisa felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she realized that something important had changed, not just for Vexthara, but for the relationship between humans and aliens on Kepler Station. The darkness lasted only 3 seconds before emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the ballroom in harsh red light. The gentle music stopped, replaced by the sharp sound of warning alarms that echoed through the station's corridors. Jake felt his training take over as his mind automatically began analyzing what might have caused a power failure of this magnitude around him. The aliens began to panic. Their conversations turned into frightened whispers in dozens of different languages, and some of the smaller species huddled together near the walls. Lisa stood frozen in the same spot where Vexthara had humiliated her, still holding her canvas bag against her chest like a shield. "Attention all residents and guests of Kepler Station," a calm voice announced over the communication system. "We are experiencing technical difficulties with our primary power grid. Please remain in your current locations while our engineering teams work to restore normal operations." This is not a drill. Jake knew immediately that this was not a simple technical problem. He had spent months working on the station's power systems, and they had multiple redundant backups that should have prevented any interruption in service. The only way to cause a failure like this would be to deliberately damage the main power coupling nodes, and that would require someone with detailed knowledge of the station's layout before he could share this information with anyone. The first explosion shook the entire ballroom. The force of it knocked several aliens off their feet and caused one of the transparent ceiling panels to crack, sending a spider web pattern across the view of the stars above. The second explosion came from a different direction, followed quickly by a third and fourth. "We are under attack," the voice on the communication system said, no longer calm. "All security personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Civilian guests should move to the nearest designated safe areas and await further instructions." The panic in the ballroom became complete chaos as hundreds of aliens tried to reach the exits at the same time. Jake watched the crowd surge toward the doors and realized that people were going to be hurt in the crush. He looked around for Lisa and saw her pressed against one of the food tables. Unable to move as larger aliens pushed past her, Jake fought his way through the crowd using his elbows and shoulders to create space. Most of the aliens were taller than him, but humans were built more solidly, and his maintenance work had made him stronger than he looked. He reached Lisa just as another explosion, much closer this time, caused the lights to flicker again. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, grabbing Lisa's arm. "But not with this crowd. They're going to crush each other trying to get through those doors." Lisa looked at him with confusion, not recognizing him from the station staff. "Who are you?" "Jake Martinez, Maintenance Division," he said. "I know this station better than most people. There are service corridors that can get us out of here safely, but we need to move now." As if to emphasize his point, another explosion rocked the station, and this time the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in again, but Jake could see that some of the ceiling panels had been damaged. Atmosphere was leaking out through the cracks, creating a whistling sound that would get worse as the pressure differential increased. "The structural integrity is compromised," Jake said, pointing at the damaged ceiling. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before this section becomes uninhabitable." Lisa nodded and followed him toward a service panel set into the wall near the back of the ballroom. Jake pulled out his maintenance key card and opened the panel, revealing a narrow corridor that ran parallel to the main hallways. The space was barely wide enough for one person, and the ceiling was so low that Jake had to crouch as he moved forward. They had traveled about 50 meters through the service corridor when they heard someone calling for help from somewhere nearby. The voice was speaking in the musical language of the Zenthari, but Jake could hear the desperation in the tone, even without understanding the words. "Someone's trapped," Lisa said. "We have to help them." Jake checked his handheld scanner, a tool that all maintenance workers carried to detect problems with the station systems. The device showed him the layout of the surrounding area, including the location of other people based on their life signs. There was definitely someone in the adjacent maintenance shaft, but the readings showed that the atmosphere in that section was becoming toxic. "It's Vexthara," Lisa said, recognizing the voice now. "He must have tried to escape through the maintenance areas like we did, but he went the wrong way." Jake's scanner showed that the life support systems in Vexthara S section had been damaged by the explosions. Poisonous gases from the damaged air recycling units were filling the space, and the Zenthari's life signs were already becoming weak. Their species had delicate respiratory systems that could not handle the kind of contamination that humans might survive for a few minutes. "He's dying," Jake said, studying the readings on his scanner. "The gas concentration in there would kill most species in about 5 minutes, and he's already been exposed for at least 3. Lisa looked at the wall that separated them from Vexthara, her face showing the conflict she felt. This was the same alien who had humiliated her in front of hundreds of witnesses, who had called her bag garbage and made her feel worthless. But he was also a living being who was suffocating alone in the dark. "Can we reach him?" she asked. Jake examined his scanner more carefully, tracing the route between their current position and the maintenance shaft where Vexthara was trapped. The direct path had been blocked by debris from the explosions, but there was another way. It would require crawling through a section of the station's environmental systems that was never designed for human access. "There's a way," Jake said slowly, "but it's dangerous. The passage goes through the main air filtration chamber, and with all the damage to the life support systems, there's no telling what kind of atmosphere is in there. Plus, the space is so narrow that only a human could fit through it. Most alien species are too large or too fragile for that kind of travel." As they talked, Vexthara's cries for help grew weaker. Lisa could hear him coughing now, his respiratory system struggling to process the contaminated air. She thought about the expensive bag he had been carrying, the one that was worth more than her entire life, according to him. She wondered if he still thought about the value of material things, now that he was facing death. "I'm going after him," Jake said, making the decision before he could think too much about the risks involved. "I've been through worse situations during my maintenance work, and I know these systems better than anyone else on the station." "You don't have to do this," Lisa said. He wasn't exactly kind to either of us. Jake looked at her seriously. "That doesn't matter. If we can save him, we have to try. That's what humans do." He began removing tools from his maintenance belt, keeping only the essential items he would need for the rescue. The passage he had to travel through was so tight that every extra ounce of weight would make the journey more difficult. Lisa watched him prepare, feeling a mixture of admiration and worry. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Jake handed her his scanner. "Monitor his life signs and guide me through the route. I'll need you to override the security locks on the environmental systems so I can access the filtration chamber. You're diplomatic. Clearance codes should work for that." Lisa nodded, accepting the responsibility. She had never been in a situation like this before, but she understood that Vexthara's life now depended on both of them working together. Jake began crawling into the narrow passage that led toward the air filtration systems, and Lisa settled in with the scanner to coordinate his rescue mission. Behind them, the sounds of the battle continued as station security fought against whoever was attacking Kepler Station. But in their small section of the maintenance areas, 2 humans were focused on saving the life of an alien who had treated them with contempt, simply because it was the right thing to do. Jake crawled through the narrow passage with his flashlight held between his teeth, the beam dancing across the metal walls ahead of him. The space was barely wide enough for his shoulders, and every few meters he had to stop and push aside cables or pipes that blocked his path. Behind him, he could hear Lisa's voice through his communication device as she guided him using the scanner readings. "Turn left at the next junction," Lisa said, her voice crackling with static. Vexthara's life signs are getting weaker, but he's still alive. You're about halfway there. The air in the passage was thick and humid, filled with the smell of overheated electronics and something else that Jake could not identify. His maintenance training told him that the station's atmospheric processors were working overtime to handle the damage from the explosions, pumping emergency air into sections where the normal life support had failed. As he crawled deeper into the station's mechanical systems, Jake began to encounter the real damage from the terrorist attack. Pipes had been torn open, spilling their contents into the passages. Electrical cables sparked where they had been severed, creating dangerous obstacles that he had to carefully navigate around. The terrorists had known exactly where to place their explosives to cause maximum damage to the station's infrastructure. "There's a problem ahead," Jake said into his communicator. "One of the main atmospheric processing units has been damaged, and it's leaking some kind of gas into the passage. I can't tell what it is from here." Lisa studied the scanner in her hands, trying to interpret the readings. Her diplomatic training had included basic station operations, but she was far from an expert on environmental systems. The scanner shows high concentrations of nitrogen and carbon dioxide, plus some trace compounds I don't recognize. Is it dangerous? Jake paused at the entrance to the damaged section, using his own portable scanner to analyze the atmosphere ahead. The readings showed that the gas mixture would not kill him immediately, but prolonged exposure could cause unconsciousness or worse. More importantly, the gas was heavier than normal air, which meant it would sink into the lower areas where Vexthara was trapped. "I need something to filter the air," Jake said. "The gas isn't immediately lethal, but it's going to make breathing difficult, and it's probably what's killing Vexthara right now." Lisa looked around the service corridor where she was stationed, searching for anything that might help. The area was filled with maintenance equipment, but nothing that looked like it could be used for air filtration. Then she remembered her grandmother's bag and the items inside it. "Wait," she said, opening the canvas bag and dumping its contents onto the floor. "My grandmother was a nurse during the war between Earth and the Mars colonies. She always carried emergency medical supplies even after she retired." Among the photos and personal items, Lisa found a small packet wrapped in waterproof material. Inside were several pieces of medical gauze, a small bottle of saline solution, and a compact multi-tool. That had belonged to her grandfather. The tools were old but well maintained, and one of them was a small air quality meter that her grandmother had carried during her military service. "I have medical gauze and saline solution," Lisa said. "Can you use those to make a filter?" Jake smiled despite the dangerous situation. "Your grandmother was smart. Wet gauze can filter out a lot of airborne contaminants, and if I layer it properly, it should give me enough protection to get through that contaminated section." Lisa guided him through the process of creating an improvised respirator using the gauze and saline solution. Jake wrapped the wet material around his nose and mouth, securing it with strips torn from his maintenance uniform. The filter was crude, but it would reduce his exposure to the toxic gases enough to keep him conscious. "How much farther?" Jake asked as he prepared to enter the contaminated area. "About 30 meters through the damaged section, then another 20 meters to reach Vexthara's location," Lisa replied. "But Jake, the life signs are very weak now. His respiratory system is shutting down." Jake began crawling through the gas-filled passage, feeling the effects of the contaminated atmosphere even through his improvised filter. The chemicals burned his eyes and made his throat feel raw, but he forced himself to keep moving. Every few meters, he had to stop and rest, fighting against the urge to remove the uncomfortable gauze from his face. The passage was more damaged here, with twisted metal and debris blocking parts of the route. Jake had to use his multi-tool to cut through some of the obstacles, a process that took precious time while Vixthara's condition continued to deteriorate. Twice he had to backtrack and find alternate routes when the direct path was completely blocked. "I can hear him," Jake said as he approached the maintenance shaft where the Xanthari was trapped. "He's still breathing, but it sounds really bad." Through a damaged ventilation grate, Jake could see Vexthara collapsed on the floor of the adjacent shaft. The alien's crystal skin had lost most of its natural glow, and the light patterns that normally moved across his body were dim and irregular. His expensive clothes were torn and stained, and his precious bioluminescent bag lay beside him, its living light faded to almost nothing. "Vexthara," Jake called out in the few words of Xanthari language he had learned during his orientation. "Help coming. Stay awake." The alien's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Jake with difficulty. He tried to speak, but the contaminated air had damaged his vocal cords, and only a weak whisper came out. Jake could see that Vexthara was dying, his body unable to process the toxic atmosphere that a human might survive for hours. "Lisa, I need you to override the environmental controls for this section," Jake said. "If I can get some clean air flowing in here, it might buy us enough time to get him out." Lisa worked frantically with her diplomatic access codes, trying to activate the emergency atmospheric systems for Jake's location. The station's computer network had been damaged by the terrorist attack, and many of the normal control pathways were not responding. She had to route her commands through backup systems that were slow and unreliable. "Got it," she said finally. "Emergency airflow is starting now. You should feel clean air coming in through the ventilation system." Jake felt the change immediately as fresh air began flowing into the contaminated shaft. Vexthara's breathing became slightly easier, and some color returned to his crystal skin. But the alien was still too weak to move on his own, and Jake realized that he would have to carry him through the narrow passages to safety. "This is going to be difficult," Jake said. "Xanthari are lighter than humans, but he's still too big to fit through some of the spaces I came through. I'll have to find a different route back." Using Lisa's scanner readings, Jake identified an alternate path that was more direct but also more dangerous. It led through a section of the station that had been damaged by the explosions, where the structural integrity was questionable and the atmosphere was still unstable. Jake carefully lifted Vixthara and began the slow journey toward safety. The alien was unconscious now, his body limp and difficult to maneuver through the tight spaces. Jake had to stop frequently to rest and check his companion's vital signs, using techniques he had learned during his emergency response training. "His breathing is getting stronger," Jake reported as they made progress through the damaged section. "The clean air is helping, but he needs medical attention soon. Station security has cleared a safe corridor about 50 meters from your current position," Lisa replied. "Medical teams are standing by to help as soon as you reach them." Jake pushed himself harder, ignoring the pain in his muscles and the burning in his lungs from the contaminated air he had breathed. Carrying Vexthara through the narrow passages was exhausting work, but he refused to give up. The alien who had humiliated Lisa was now completely dependent on human determination and ingenuity for his survival. As they finally approached the safe corridor where the medical teams waited, Jake realized that this rescue had changed something fundamental about the relationship between humans and aliens on Kepler Station. Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked down the long hallway of Kepler Station. The maintenance uniform felt too tight around his shoulders, and the fabric scratched against his skin. He had been working on the air filtration systems for 12 hours straight, and all he wanted was to get back to his small quarters and sleep. The hallway stretched ahead of him, lined with polished metal walls that reflected the soft blue light from overhead panels. Jake could hear music coming from somewhere nearby, along with voices speaking in languages he did not recognize. He turned a corner and stopped when he saw a crowd of people gathered outside a set of large doors. Most of them were not human. Jake recognized some of the alien species from his orientation materials when he first arrived at the station. There were tall, thin beings with silver skin and no hair, creatures that looked like walking crystals, and others that seemed to be made of liquid metal that held a solid shape. All of them wore expensive clothes that sparkled and glowed in ways that human fabric could not. A security guard stood near the entrance, checking identification cards. Jake reached for his work badge, thinking he might need to show it if anyone asked, but the guard barely looked at him. Instead, the alien guard glanced at Jake's uniform and waved him through with one of his 4 arms. Jake realized too late. And his maintenance uniform looked similar to the server uniforms he had seen other humans wearing around the station. The colors were almost the same dark blue, and both had the station logo on the chest. Before he could correct the mistake, he found himself inside a massive ballroom filled with hundreds of aliens. The ceiling stretched high above him, made of transparent material that showed the stars and the swirling colors of the gas giant Nereus. Prime below, tables covered with strange foods lined the walls, and servers moved between groups of aliens carrying trays of drinks that glowed and bubbled. Jake had never seen anything like it. He tried to back toward the door, but more aliens kept entering behind him, pushing him deeper into the room. Jake decided to find a quiet corner where he could wait until the crowd thinned out, then slip away without causing any trouble. As he moved along the wall, Jake noticed a young human woman standing near one of the food tables. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style and wearing a dress that was elegant, but not as flashy as what the aliens wore. She carried a worn canvas messenger bag over her shoulder, the kind of bag that students might use for school books. The woman seemed comfortable talking to the aliens around her, switching between English and other languages that Jake could not understand. She smiled and nodded as she listened to their conversations, but Jake could see something in her eyes that suggested she felt as out of place as he did. Lisa Park had been attending diplomatic events like this one since she was a child. Her father served as Earth's ambassador to the Kepler sector, which meant she had grown up around aliens and learned their customs. But even after all these years, she still felt like she was pretending to belong. The canvas bag she carried had been a gift from her grandmother before she died. Inside were photos of her family back on Earth, along with some personal items that helped her remember home. The bag was old and showed signs of wear, but Lisa kept it with her because it made her feel connected to something real in a world full of artificial politeness. She was talking to a group of Xanthari diplomats when she heard someone behind her speaking loudly. The Xanthari were known for their crystal-like skin that could change colors based on their emotions, and Lisa had learned to read their moods by watching the patterns of light that moved across their bodies. The craftsmanship on this piece is absolutely divine, one of them was saying in accented English. It took 17 master artisans working for 2 full cycles to complete the bio-threading alone. Lisa turned to see what they were discussing, and found herself looking at the most elaborate handbag she had ever seen. It seemed to be alive, with patterns of light flowing across its surface like water. The material looked organic, as if it had been grown rather than manufactured, and it pulsed gently with its own internal rhythm. The alien holding the bag was clearly Xanthari, but his skin glowed brighter than the others, indicating high social status. His clothes were made from what looked like liquid starlight, and jewelry that defied physics floated around his neck and wrists. This was Vexthara Kolneth, though Lisa did not know his name yet. The bioluminescent fibers are harvested from the singing crystals of Veltara Prime. Vexthara continued, enjoying the attention his bag was receiving. Each fiber must be extracted during the planet's triple eclipse, when the resonance frequencies are perfectly aligned. The cost was more than most civilizations spend on their entire military budgets. Other aliens gathered around to admire the bag, their own accessories seeming plain by comparison. Lisa found herself staring as well, fascinated by the way the light patterns seemed to respond to Vexthara's touch. She had never seen anything so beautiful or so obviously expensive. Without thinking, Lisa stepped closer to get a better look. The crowd around Vexthara was thick, and she had to squeeze between two large aliens to see the bag properly. As she moved forward, her own canvas bag swung around her body and bumped against Vexthara's arm. The contact was gentle, barely enough to disturb the fabric of his sleeve, but Vexthara reacted as if he had been struck. He spun around, his crystal skin flashing bright red with anger, and found himself face to face with Lisa and her worn canvas bag. "How dare you?" Vexthara said, his voice rising above the conversation around them. "Do you have any idea what this bag is worth?" Lisa stepped back, confused by the intensity of his reaction. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bump into you. I was just trying to see. This bag is worth more than you." Vexthara shouted, holding his glowing accessory high above his head. His skin now blazed with indignant light, the pattern shifting rapidly as his emotions peaked. This single piece represents the finest artistry in the galaxy, created by masters whose skills have been passed down for thousands of years. "And you dare to touch it with that primitive thing?" He pointed at Lisa's canvas bag with obvious disgust, as if it might contaminate the air around them. The entire ballroom had gone quiet, hundreds of aliens turning to watch the confrontation. Lisa felt her face burning with embarrassment as she realized that everyone was staring at her. Jake had been watching from his corner near the wall, and he felt his hands clench into fists as he saw what was happening. He recognized the look on Lisa's face, the same expression he had seen on human faces throughout his life, when they were made to feel small and worthless by someone with more money or power. "Your species collects garbage and calls it sentimental," Vexthara continued, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You have no understanding of true value, no appreciation for genuine artistry. That bag of yours probably cost less than the tax I pay on my morning beverage." Lisa looked down at her grandmother's bag, seeing it suddenly through alien eyes. The canvas was faded and had small stains from years of use. The metal clasps were tarnished, and one corner showed wear. She had tried to repair a small tear with tape. Compared to the living artwork that Vexthara carried, her bag did look like garbage, but inside that bag were the photos her grandmother had taken during her wedding, pictures of Lisa's parents when they were young, and the recipe cards written in her grandmother's careful handwriting. The bag might not be worth much money, but it contained everything that mattered to Lisa about her family and her past. She wanted to explain this to Vexthara, to help him understand that some things had value beyond their price, but the words would not come. His humiliation was too complete, the audience too large. Instead, she simply stood there while aliens around the room began to whisper and laugh, some of them pointing at her bag and shaking their heads in amusement. Jake pushed away from the wall and started moving through the crowd toward Lisa, but before he could reach her, the lights in the ballroom suddenly flickered and went out.